Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Before we go on to the main topic, and I'm only going to discuss one topic today, it's going to be a shorter video as a result. I just want to make a corrective to some claims that were out earlier about geolocation of the Ukrainian forces in Zavitne Bazhanya. So just to let you know where that is, if we look at the map, if we go to the Velika Novosilka area, it's down the river just south of Uruzhany, and there were claims of geolocation of the Ukrainians in the eastern part of the village of Zavitne Bazhanya, and they are apparently false. Ukrainian forces have not entered Zavitne Bazhanya. The geolocation is or was false, and Defmon says the same as well. I've not got that there. There was another source saying that too. Yep, there it is. That's Defmon saying there is a rumor about the Ukrainian advances around Zavitne Bazhanya. I believe this is false. I think it's based on a rumor started by a German tabloid writer prone to sensationalism who posted a bad geolocation on Twitter, which he later removed. I mean, the great thing is that people check these things and do correctives, and yeah, that doesn't appear to be true. So what I claimed earlier, take that as not yet being the case. Anyway, to go on to the main topic of what I was going to talk about, what I'm going to do is take a chunk out of what I recorded yesterday for my extra, but it made the extra too long. And so I'm just going to plonk that recording, that excerpt into this, and it will be to do with the cost of disposing of equipment. The context of this is the idea that when the US say, for example, and this I'm sure will be the same with other countries, but I use the US as an example, being that they are the largest in real terms assisters of the Ukrainians in the war. Now, when they announce they're aiding, they're giving a $20 billion package, the question is how do they get those figures? And quite often they are putting a price tag on kit that is either being, is drawdown stuff that is either obsolete or due to be replaced at some point, or so on and so forth. And I've already talked at some great length about this idea and how the funding is equated often over years if they are paying for stuff, but quite often they're not actually paying for stuff. This is stuff that has already been bought and paid for, and they're just giving it away and putting a price tag on it, and then they're communicating that to the world. And often, I mean, particularly the American public are going to be are sitting there going, "Oh my goodness, we are giving all this money to Ukraine." The simple fact of the matter is that the US are not going to the big bank of the Federal Reserves, and they're not taking out like $20 billion in cash and flying it over to Ukraine and dumping $20 billion on the Ukrainians' tables. They're not saying, there you go, do with it what you will. Sometimes they are giving cash, but that is, or at least, transfers of money, but that is with strings attached, and there will be some kind of quid pro quo. It's not often that the US is just going to give a load of money and say, do with that what you will. It might be a loan where they're getting it back. It might be with provisos. We'll give you this money if you do this, this, and this, or if we have access to that. So there will be benefits for the US. But ostensibly, most often they are not giving cash at all or money at all. They're giving equipment, and that equipment has usually been bought and paid for. Now, that's not all the time. In fact, I say usually, just many times. It's difficult to know exactly, what the stats are. What I'm claiming and what I'm going to claim in the rest of this video is not that this is what the US do all the time, but that this is responsible, or the US does this at least some of the time. There are pieces of equipment that are high value new equipment that they are building to send to Ukraine, like HIMARS rockets and so on and so forth, or missiles. So there are lots of ways that the US helps Ukraine: humanitarian, military, financial assistance. But to look at the totals that the US have announced and say, well, the US has given this to Ukraine, and therefore, that is money out of paying for hospitals and schools, is simply not correct. Do not think like that. So when people like the Heritage Foundation, for example, say, they're paying this much per head to Ukraine, and actually they're not giving this much per head to the victims of the Maui fires or whatever. However it was that they framed that. Just be really wary, because that money, they're two completely separate pots, and one actually almost isn't a pot. It's just equipment sitting in warehouses that they're shipping to Ukraine. The other is money that is actually comes from completely different pots, often local pots or FEMA or all these other organizations and places where that money will find its way to wildfire support for those people. And it's disingenuous if you think that, or you claim that the US is giving money to Ukraine at the expense of paying for schools and hospitals and whatever. It's just wrong. But anyway, I'll leave you now to me yesterday talking about the cost of disposing of US equipment. Right. This is, now I love this. So I love being challenged, because I was rightly challenged here. Although I'd maybe, I think it's a little bit over-egged in places. But anyway, challenged by Luffa1432. I don't know what that looks like. When people's names come up on YouTube Studio like this, it comes up with it in a different way than when I look on Threads. Say I look on my phone, just on the normal YouTube app. The name is just changed. It goes back to some kind of, it's a code name, sort of, if you like, or a username code, quite often for YouTube Studio. So some people talk to me and they think I know who they are, but actually I don't recognize them because it gives a different code. And so I can talk past people. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, Lafar here says, Jonathan, more voodoo economics. So this is where I was talking about how it can be advantageous for the US, for example, or any nation, to dispose of obsolete equipment to Ukraine, and it can save money in terms of the cost of disposal and the cost of storage as well. He says, please cite your sources for the specific items that the US had warehoused and saved disposal costs by shipping it to Ukraine. And this is absolutely right. So I make these claims, and I'm generally regurgitating claims that are widespread in a lot of media places. But actually, have I gone and looked to make sure that those claims are correct? This is a kind of an urban legend that is possibly true in some obscure cases. Please give your sources or move on from repeating this. Glory to Ukraine. So there's a pro-Ukrainian guy, but obviously wants some kind of, clarity as to these claims, and thinks that they are ostensibly not true. Now, I said, just off the top of my head, 500 M113, so those are the old, definitely obsolete armoured personnel carriers that are being replaced as we speak. So the US has, I forget how many thousands they have, but just thousands of M113s, and they are being replaced. They're literally at the end of their lives. And I said, I'm fairly sure the US are not using all of their 6,700 plus Bradleys, and can share the 180 that the US have given. So there's a couple of examples there where the M113s are being absolutely replaced. Bradleys are sort of being replaced, but you have different kind of life extensions to them and different variants of them. But there's certainly 6,700 sitting around in warehouses. Some will be being used, but there are many thousands of these that are not being used. So they have been paid for. So my point is, if you're giving 180 Bradleys, like, how much is that costing the US government? So if now the US government said, here are 300 Bradleys, right, and we're going to give them to Ukraine, what would that cost the US government? And I very clearly said, the only thing I think it really costs is the cost of transport. And there are some claims that even that is covered sometimes by other nations wanting to help Ukraine but don't have the equipment. Or you can maybe say to the US, if you can provide 300 Bradleys, and I don't know if this happens, right? So this is one of those kind of claims. But I have heard that, they can pay for the transport. Okay, so if that happens, then the US would be paying like nothing really. They might have to like dust them up and make sure they're ready to go. But even that, that gets outsourced to other corporate companies that, again, it might not even be the US that's paying for that. So anyway, that's the cost is a complicated topic, and there's a lot of unknowns, but there's very good cases to be made that actually it's not costing the like price tag that the US are putting on those vehicles. So they'd say, right, one Bradley is worth X amount of money. So 180 Bradleys is worth X $1 million. So we are giving X $1 million worth of assistance to Ukraine. And my point was very simple, that that's not what is happening. Now, it might be in some cases where they are giving, like HIMARS missiles is probably a really good example, where HIMARS are in demand, the US still uses them, there's a stockpile that they have, blah, blah, blah. That all the HIMARS missiles that are given to Ukraine will be like bought to give to Ukraine. Right, so that's a different kettle of fish, really. What I'm saying, there are occasions where there's equipment that is given that is either saving the US money or is not costing the US money, and yet they say it has this price tag. And I don't think those are obscure examples either. I went on to say Stingers. The Stinger's reprogrammable microprocessor has become obsolete in 2023, and they're looking for a replacement. The new Javelin G model is to replace old models. So if you're giving Javelins, if you're going to replace them anyway with a new model, I know there's some issues with the new Javelin G model as far as I understand, but the idea is you're going to replace all those Javelins. Like literally all of them will be replaced by a better version, right? And so what are you going to do with them? We'll come on to that in a second. About 9,000 Max Pro vehicles were bought by the US between 2007 and 2011, and they plan to keep about 3,000 of them. So what's going on with the other 6,000, right? And we can talk about what happens when you decommission equipment. So some can get turned into training. Literally, you can put them on a firing range and fire at them. They sink stuff. They can get turned into civilian vehicles, some of them, or they get scrapped. And those are the main, or they get sold on or moved on to other armies. And this is like one of the ways of getting rid of equipment is given to Ukraine. So US gave 440 or so Max Pros to Ukraine. Again, I just don't think some of these big headline pieces or maybe the mid-range pieces are too much of an issue for the US to give. It's kind of what I was saying. So he said, okay, fine. However, you stated several times that US was saving money by shipping these items to Ukraine, and you didn't prove this point on any of these items. Absolutely correct. First of all, show that these items have no market value or enough utility to justify storage costs. Well, I think you can kind of imply that. I think you can infer that, from the fact they've got 6,700 Bradleys, and how many Bradleys are they going to be using at any one time? Even at the height of the Iraq War. I'm guessing your intent is to say that this equipment is not first-line equipment, and that the US is likely to issue their military, but that it is absolutely not the exaggeration you give in your podcast. And I said, okay, Google a Forbes article. We're going to go through that. Ukraine converts $21.9 billion in US military surplus into fearsome force from December as a start. And then he said, I'll read that, but I'm sure it doesn't support your inflammatory statement. I don't think I've said an inflammatory statement with regard to, I think that's real rhetoric with regard to a procurement of equipment. I mean, goodness me, I don't think I'm inflaming anything here. That storage costs exceed the material's value, and US saves money by shipping this to Ukraine. I never said storage costs exceed the value, and it depends how you value a piece of kit that's already been bought and paid for. So I think that is a straw man in my position. How does this compare to Britain saving millions by shipping obsolete tanks and cruise missiles to Ukraine to save storage costs? Is this true? Right, let's have a look. I mean, this is genuinely a good set of questions. I would just couch it maybe a bit nicer, which is, okay, you've said that. Where's your evidence to support that, mate? Absolutely. Now, annoyingly, it's actually really difficult. So this is what I'm doing is repeating a claim that is actually quite widespread. A lot of people make the claims that I'm saying, but actually there's not a lot of really good evidence because I don't think it's been publicly put out there, particularly in a very kind of organized fashion by the US military. It's like, well, actually, it would cost this much for us to get rid of these Stinger missiles. We are going to get rid of them. And so therefore, it is actually saving us money to give them to Ukraine rather than dispose of them safely, blah, blah, blah. I just don't think the information's out there. I mean, someone's got that information, but it's just not online. But anyway, this Forbes article from last year, bear in mind this is an outdated article now. It's from December last year. But it is Ukraine converts $21.9 billion in US military surplus into fearsome force. Right. So let's dip into this. We have aid to Ukraine has in effect shattered the Russian military, exposing it as little more than a paper tiger. The war has helped destroy Russia's once burgeoning arms bazaar, ruining Russian efforts to destabilize strategic regions. Enabling this fight has bolstered Ukraine's commitment to their nation, critical for advancing society building and anti-corruption efforts there. Facilitating Ukraine's resistance may even end the kleptocratic reign of Vladimir Putin, paving the way for a more just, if not more democratic society in Russia itself. So this is just all about saying, okay, these are the benefits that come about come from giving Ukraine this equipment. In all, the $21.9 billion has been very well spent. Had America held back the support and just let Russia roll over Ukraine, America would have spent far more in keeping Russia from suborning the rest of Europe. Okay, helping Ukraine stand against overt aggression has already offered a great return on investment. America has frittered away far more for far less strategic benefit, as in the past. The Second Iraq War of 2003 cost the US over $1 trillion. Afghanistan cost another $1 trillion in 2022 dollars. Those two conflicts, which offered little strategic advantage to the US, make the $21 billion in Ukraine security aid look like chump change. That is massively important. Okay. Second string US gear has rarely been used so effectively. While the numbers and list of gear are impressive, America hasn't given it away, given very much that might impact America's security in a substantial way. We've handed over a lot of former Russian or otherwise obsolete equipment, including 45 Russian T-72B main battle tanks and 20 Mi-17 helicopters. Much of the gear sent to Ukraine was headed for either the scrap heap or to other allies. Now, each of those would have had a value put on them, no doubt. To a general audience, armoured personnel carriers sound impressive. The fact that America gave Ukraine some 200 M113s, I mean, it's more than that now, armoured personnel carriers sounds a big deal. But military experts know that America stopped building these tracked utility vehicles about 25 years ago and is busy stripping them from the US force. Other surplus gear has gone to Ukraine. During America's counterinsurgency conflicts, the army procured a lot of M1117 armoured security vehicles, a wheeled armoured car between 1999 and 2014, more appropriate for military constabulary duties than full-scale conflict. The US has already been drawing down the vehicle inventory, so the 250 sent to Ukraine, more than that now, won't be missed. To give an idea of where Ukraine sits in terms of donations, the US gave 200 of these vehicles to Colombia in 2020. Over 700 were produced for the Afghanistan army, and 400 went to the Iraqi armed forces. So actually, they've given, at the time of writing here, I think it's more now, they've given about as many to Ukraine as they had to Colombia. At least in Ukraine, these vehicles are directly supporting US goals. Some fancy militarized sounding gifts have centered around mobility. A grant of almost 300 to 400 tactical vehicles may impress a general audience, but they're all just military trucks built to carry between 2.5 or 5 tons. American taxpayers gave Ukraine 477 mine-resistant AMPAS protection vehicles built for a grinding counterinsurgency. The US military has been so eager to shed the heavy, hard-to-maintain vehicles, it has handed them out to police departments all over the US. Right. So if this guy is asking me for evidence that, well, the US are trying to get rid of them, so they're literally giving them to police departments. Like, this is one way of disposing of them. So we know they want to dispose of them. And that is the cheapest way of them doing that, literally giving them. Because any other way of getting rid of that is going to cost. You might say, well, they could get scrap profit from that. But actually, I think you'd have to strip the amount of money it would cost to strip out all the sensitive stuff and the military stuff means that actually it's not as simple as that. Anyway, America has provided some 1,200 high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, better known as Humvees. They have 206,000 of these. It's just a phenomenal amount of these, and they're kind of old school now. The US is busy replacing this modern retake of the old military Jeep with a newer version called the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. What are they going to do with 200,000 odd plus Humvees? Even the newly popular artillery systems, when donated, the future of much of the 142, 155mm and 36, 105mm howitzers, the 10 120mm and 10 82mm and 10 60mm mortar systems donated to Ukraine were in doubt. The Marine Corps was aiming to cut their M777 howitzer batteries from 21 to 5. They're cutting their M777 howitzer batteries by 3/4. But the importance of artillery on the Ukrainian battlefield may have changed a few opinions. Well, they might decide, we might need to keep hold of them because actually it's not so obsolete now. In air defence, all the focus has been on yet to be delivered Patriot air defence battery and 8 national advanced surface-to-air missile systems and NASAMS. But the bigger story is in the old Hawk missiles the US is supplying. The US hasn't used Hawk missiles since 2002. And given that we made thousands of them, it would be very interesting to know more about how these old missiles are doing in the field. So on and so forth. And it goes on to say, look, we're also giving them good stuff as well. And I'm not saying that everything the US is giving is stuff that's obsolete and being replaced, as I've said earlier. Okay, so yeah, they're giving Patriots and they're giving like really high value stuff as well. And some stuff that has been untested, like the Switchblades that weren't so successful when they were initially given. And actually, I think, Ukraine has ended up using a lot of their own kind of drone tech. However, I think there's been a bounce back for some of the Switchblade as well. So anyway, you get the point. So yeah, the use of relatively modern man-made portable, man-portable or other small defensive anti-tank and anti-aircraft systems, 1,600 Stinger, 8,500 Javelin, 46,000 other armor systems, anti-armor systems, as well as 1,500 TOW anti-tank missiles and 13,000 grenade launchers, have likely outstripped America's ability to produce munitions. But again, the largesse has only made a small dent in America's supplies. Over the years, America has produced tens of thousands of Stingers and almost 50,000 Javelins. Right? So again, there's that side of it as well. So on and so forth. I thought that was a really useful article. And then I was just trying to look around for like the cost of getting rid of stuff. And I came across a few articles. Now, this is an old article, right? This is from the 1990s. And it's called The Cost of Disarmament, Dismantlement of Weapons and the Disposal of Military Surplus. And it turns out that getting rid of military surplus is something the US does on an annual basis, and it spends an absolute bucket load of money doing it. And this is partly why the US defense budget is so unfeasibly huge. Just this alone, between 1989 and 1995, so 6 years, the US Navy spent about $780 million to dismantle ballistic missile submarines. I mean, just to get rid of some submarines, that was $780 million. I mean, that dwarfs, what's been given to Ukraine already, right? It's just, that's getting rid of some stuff. Okay, they're big nuclear submarines, but you get the point. US Air Force is decommissioning, and this is back in the 90s, so this is 30-year-old money, right? The US Air Force is decommissioning 148 of its B-52 bombers and destroying another 217. It has multiple 200 F-111 aircraft, blah, blah, blah. It goes on. And it says, hence not only avoiding the cost of destroying missiles that cost more than $10 million each year to produce. So, like, you have something called LCC. It's basically the life cycle cost. I think it is life cycle cost. So, they think about how much these things cost to make, cost to maintain, and then cost to get rid of at the end of their life cycle. And that's a whole life cycle cost. But yeah, all in all, the Air Force will spend about $60 million on mothballing and dismantling surplus arms between 1993 and 2000. So that's like just the Air Force in 7 years, and this is going back, as I say, 25 years plus. It was spending like almost $10 million a year getting rid of stuff. In 1993, the US Air Force started destroying the first of 500 excess missile silos. 300 of these are to be destroyed at the cost of $35 million. I wonder what that would equate to nowadays. While the fate of the remaining 200 is yet to be determined. So on and so forth. I mean, absolutely fascinating, some of this. You get the disposal of missile propellants. It's not just like getting rid of a missile. You think, oh, it's a bit of just it's only a bit of metal. Actually, no, you've got explosive propellants, you've got all this kind of stuff. And not, obviously, nuclear is another whole conversation, isn't it? So let's look at this little section to do with conventional weapons and NATO, really. So the whole CFE disarmament process is not expected to cost more than $1 to $2 billion. NATO's Verification Coordinating Committee concluded in late 1994 that destruction or decommissioning is less costly than mothballing surplus equipment. Right. There's a really important point here. So the guy said, well, you know, calling me out on the cost of mothballing, which is basically storing it. And actually, here is a claim that the cost of disposing it is cheaper than mothballing it, than just keeping it in storage until you might want to use it at a future date. So that is important. That, you know, that's coming from a military document. Among members of NATO, Germany and the US have by far the largest expenses in carrying out the CFE provision, so getting rid of the stuff. The annual expenditures of the other NATO states are far lower, typically not surpassing $5 million each. So that's Germany is disposing of about 80% of the equipment of the defunct East German armed forces and a projected 30% of the pre-unification Bundeswehr. All in all, close to 11,000 major weapon systems and were targeted for elimination by 1995 and 25,000 during the following 15 years. The German government spent 864 million Deutschmark, slightly more than $500 million during 1991 to 1994 on destroying equipment. Just huge, you know, talks about tanks and all sorts. I'm sure there was just one more bit. Here it is. It's just on ammunition, you know, including small arms ammunition and whatnot. In the second half of the 1980s, the US Army demilitarized an average of about 24,000 tons of ammunition each year. So every year in the 1980s, they got rid of 24,000 tons of ammunition. But with the end of the Cold War, the stockpile slated for demilitarization grew substantially. About 340,000 tons of ammunition were demilitarized during 1990 to 1995 at a cost of about $300 million, almost $900 per ton. So they spent $300 million getting rid of ammunition. The annual budget grew from $15 million in 1990 to $100 million in 1995. So in 1995, the US military budget took into account $100 million to get rid of ammunition. Not to buy ammunition, to get rid of ammunition. Just insane. And so on and so forth. I mean, you get the point. So, like, I love being challenged on stuff. And this is what this has made me do, is go and find the information to actually substantiate my claims with more certainty. So I really thank this guy for that. I presume it's a guy. And it was absolutely right to challenge me because I didn't provide this information first. And I actually should do. And when I do my philosophical writing, that's how I would go about doing my writing, which is, you know, argument from assertions are not arguments. They're just assertions, right? And that is not good enough. So that's brilliant. However, you know, I would also come away from this saying I was right? And I've got some receipts for that. Now, I'm not saying that every bit of equipment is like that. Okay, so don't get me wrong, but there are definitely elements of military assistance that are being given to Ukraine, and we know this from other nations as well, trying to like look through their old inventories and go, well, let's give them that old crap. You know, so the YPR, all the M113s that are being given, you know, they're at the end of their lives. So, you know, the different Western nations are clamoring to get rid of those and other pieces of kit like that. And that is, they might put a number on that, like a price tag on that. And it's a bit of a false advertising, I would say. So there you go. And then just one more. This is not from the 90s, 2006, still almost 20 years old. This is talking about the demilitarization of significant military equipment. I've just highlighted this. The Department of Defense, so the DoD, identifies and disposes, and this is from 2006, of approximately $20 billion of military surplus excess material annually. Now that does include things like desks and chairs, but really that's not going to be the cost of $20 billion annually. But 2006, part of the budget for the US military must have been $20 billion to get rid of weapons. So again, hopefully there are some receipts to, you know, you can go look through like pieces of writing like this to get a better idea. Hopefully I've given you some idea. Oh, look, here it is, life cycle costing of military equipment. So yeah, you have 3 phases of the life cycle. And yeah, if I do a Control F, disposal, so acquisition cost, ownership cost, and disposal cost, and that's your LCC. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the final thing for today. Although I've probably spoken for too long, I have spoken for too long. So anyway, thank you very much. I'll leave that to tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Take care and speak soon.